December 1944. The Ardennes forest. The air is still, wrapped in the kind of cold that bites through cloth and skin alike. Snow drifts over twisted trees and the broken shapes of men who fought here just hours earlier. Through the lens of a German carabiner 98K rifle, an American soldier appears. His silhouette moves between the pines, his breath visible against the frost. The sniper exhales, steadies, and fires. The crack echoes. The soldier collapses to one knee, stunned, but not dead. A small dent marks the crown of his steel helmet. He touches it, trembling, realizing the bullet never pierced through. From a nearby ridge, the German sniper lowers his rifle, confused. He adjusts his scope, mutters under his breath, and fires again. The second round glances off with a metallic ring. The target scrambles for cover. By dusk, word spreads among German marksmen. The Americans wear helmets that won't die. What began as a rumor soon became an obsession to understand how the United States built a helmet that could cheat death itself. Before the Second World War began, the combat helmet was an overlooked piece of equipment, a relic of an earlier era when artillery shrapnel, not rifle fire, caused most battlefield deaths. During the 1930s, many armies still viewed helmets as psychological comfort more than real protection. Soldiers wore them because they looked like armor, not because they could stop a bullet. The U.S. Army was no exception. Its standard issue, the M1917 Doughboy helmet, was essentially an American copy of the British Brodie helmet from World War I. Shallow, with a wide brim that shielded soldiers from falling fragments but left the sides, neck, and ears exposed. It worked well in static trench warfare, where the primary danger came from overhead shell bursts. But the next war would be different. By the late 1930s, military planners in Washington were already studying reports from Spain and China, where modern mechanized warfare was unfolding. Tanks, automatic weapons, and dive bombers had transformed the battlefield into a 360-degree storm of steel. Soldiers no longer hid in trenches. They moved fast, attacked from multiple directions, and fought at close range. The M1917 helmet suddenly looked like a relic from another age. More museum piece than protection. In 1939, the U.S. Army's Ordnance Department began an ambitious redesign program. Their goal, to develop a new helmet that could withstand not just fragments, but also grazing bullets, debris, and shock waves from nearby explosions. It had to be comfortable, adjustable, and compatible with gas masks, field telephones, and radio headsets. The work was entrusted to engineers and designers at the Infantry Board at Fort Benning and the Material Division of the Ordnance Department. They experimented with over a dozen prototypes, varying shapes, angles, and materials, before settling on a revolutionary two-piece system. The final design, approved in June 1941, was christened the M1 helmet. It was a technical leap forward. Its outer shell was stamped from a single sheet of Hadfield manganese steel, a high-carbon alloy known for its unique ability to harden upon impact while retaining flexibility. Inside sat a removable fiber liner made of compressed resin-impregnated cloth. Soldiers could wear the liner alone for non-combat duties or insert it into the steel shell for full protection. Unlike the tall, flat dish of the M1917, the M1 had a deep dome and a lower brim that wrapped around the head like a protective cocoon. This new contour offered protection not only from above, but from the sides, exactly where modern combat inflicted most wounds. The distinctive pot shape became instantly recognizable. The innovation didn't stop at design. America's immense industrial base was mobilized to produce it at unprecedented scale. Factories such as McCord Radiator and Manufacturing Company in Detroit and Schlueter Manufacturing in Illinois retooled their assembly lines, turning out helmets by the tens of thousands every month. The United States would eventually produce over 22.2 million M1 helmets during the war, enough to equip every soldier, sailor, and Marine, with millions more sent to Allied forces through Lend-Lease. When the first shipments reached training camps in 1941, soldiers were skeptical. The M1 felt heavier than the old model, its chin strap awkward at first, but as troops trained, they noticed how well it balanced, how the suspension system distributed weight evenly across the head. It stayed put when crawling or diving for cover. It could even serve as a wash basin, cooking pot, or shovel, a multi-purpose symbol of the American soldier's adaptability. By the time the United States entered combat in North Africa in 1942, the M1 was everywhere. German officers and intelligence analysts studying captured equipment noted the change. They described the new American helmet as low-slung, protective, and strangely well-made. Field reports from Tunisia recorded an unusual number of head wounds among U.S. troops, where the steel had absorbed or deflected the strike. The wearer might be concussed or bruised, but alive. To the Germans, this was curious, but not alarming. Their own Stahlhelm M35, introduced years earlier, was already considered one of the best designs in the world. It was heavier, thicker, and gave superb coverage. But as the war expanded and firefights grew faster and more chaotic, a subtle difference emerged. The M1's rounder dome often caused bullets and shrapnel to glance off instead of embedding. At first, this was just a technical note buried in field observations. No one realized yet that the helmet, simple, silent, and almost invisible amid the machinery of war, would quietly change survival statistics across every front it touched. Soon, German snipers on the Western Front would notice something that would challenge their confidence entirely. By 1944, the M1 helmet was as common to the American soldier as his rifle. It went ashore with him at Normandy, marched through the mud of Italy, and crossed the coral ridges of the Pacific. Everywhere it appeared, it carried a quiet reputation, not of invincibility, but of trust. Soldiers spoke of it the way others spoke of luck. When the Germans first faced large numbers of U.S. troops in Europe, they studied everything they could get their hands on: rations, rifles, uniforms, and equipment. Captured helmets, in particular, drew curiosity. They were heavier than the German Stahlhelm M40, yet somehow more balanced. Their steel composition felt different to the touch. When fired upon in tests, the rounds didn't punch clean holes. They deflected, even when the impact was close. At the Wehrmacht Ordnance testing grounds near Kummersdorf, German engineers conducted controlled trials on captured Allied gear. When they fired standard 7.92 million Mauser rounds at the American M1, they noticed something intriguing. The bullet often ricocheted at shallow angles instead of penetrating. The helmet's round profile and high manganese content allowed it to give slightly under pressure, absorbing energy rather than shattering or cracking. The Germans noted this in their reports, but they had other priorities. The war was turning. Factories were bombed, resources scarce, and replacing the stalwart Stahlhelm wasn't feasible. Still, the field anecdotes spread, especially among snipers. By late 1944, on the Western Front, German marksmen noticed a pattern. American infantrymen hit squarely in the head, sometimes stood up again. A sniper could land what seemed a perfect shot, only for the target to flinch, stumble, and then crawl away behind a ridge. Through the scope, it made no sense. One sniper's log from the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division mentioned helmet strikes that leave no blood. Another report, written after the fighting in the Hürtgen forest, described finding M1 helmets with deep indentations and no fatal wound beneath. The steel had deformed but not pierced. The confusion soon turned into grudging respect. Some Wehrmacht officers ordered ballistic comparisons between the M1 and their own helmets. Others, especially on the Eastern Front, tried to acquire captured American helmets from supply depots or fallen soldiers, hoping to test them for themselves. Meanwhile, U.S. field medics began documenting survival cases that bordered on miraculous. Soldiers who had taken grazing shots to the skull, wounds that should have been instantly fatal, often escaped with concussions or scalp cuts. In medical briefings after Normandy, and again during the Battle of the Bulge, officers credited the helmet with saving thousands of men who otherwise would have been listed as killed in action. One report from the 1st Army Medical Department, dated January 1945, recorded that up to 70% of non-penetrating head injuries resulted in survival when the M1 was worn properly. The numbers weren't perfect, but they told a story every soldier understood instinctively. The helmet worked. Even on the Pacific Front, where shrapnel and mortar fire claimed more lives than rifles, Marines praised their steel pot. It wasn't just protection, it was identity. It went into battle, to the mess tent, even into sleep. Soldiers sometimes kept it on as an unconscious reassurance against chaos. The Germans, however, saw it differently. To their snipers, professionals trained in precision and control, the M1 helmet became a symbol of frustration. Shots that should have ended fights turned into narrow escapes. The Americans, they noted, seemed protected by more than just luck. As winter closed in over the Ardennes, and the forests of Belgium turned into white labyrinths of snow and smoke, German snipers watched their targets through scopes and began to understand. Something about those helmets changed the rules of engagement. They began collecting them, testing them, and slowly, a realization spread through their ranks that the American approach to protection wasn't about thicker steel or heavier armor, but about design, balance, and a nation's ability to outthink rather than outbuild. Soon, these quiet studies would reveal why the United States had created not just a better helmet, but a new philosophy of soldier survival. The M1 helmet wasn't just a product of better steel. It was a symbol of American engineering logic, solving a deadly problem with efficiency rather than excess. To understand why it performed so well, one must look at how it was built, tested, and continually improved through feedback from the field. From the beginning, the Ordnance Department treated the helmet as more than a piece of armor. It was an integrated system. The outer shell, stamped from a single piece of 1.35 millimeter Hadfield manganese steel, was designed to be flexible rather than brittle. Its resilience came from the alloy's unique property. Under sudden impact, it hardened locally at the point of contact, dispersing energy outward through the curved surface. This made direct penetrations rare unless the shot was nearly perpendicular. Inside, the fiber liner acted as a shock absorber, reducing blunt trauma and preventing skull fractures from concussive force. The web suspension system, a simple triangle of cotton straps, kept the steel off the soldier's head by about an inch, creating an air gap. That empty space often made the difference between life and death. Tests. At Aberdeen Proving Ground during 1942–43, confirmed the helmet could withstand shrapnel at close range and even deflect low-velocity bullets. The curvature of its dome meant that glancing blows were far more likely than direct hits. It was, by design, a surface meant to cheat physics. By contrast, the German Stahlhelm was built like armor, thicker and more rigid, but with a flatter profile and heavier weight. It provided excellent side protection, but, when struck at certain angles, could transmit dangerous shock waves to the skull. Its success relied on brute strength, while the M1 relied on balance and geometry. This contrast reflected more than engineering preference. It mirrored national philosophy. German equipment often emphasized craftsmanship and durability, overbuilt in every sense. American design emphasized standardization, speed, and adaptability. Field repair was another example. A damaged M1 helmet could be replaced or refitted in minutes because parts were interchangeable. The liner and shell could be swapped, straps replaced, liners repaired in workshops near the front. Soldiers didn't need to wait for a factory or armorer. They fixed it themselves. As war raged from Italy to the Pacific, the M1 became proof that American mass production could achieve not just quantity, but quality through intelligent design. And it was this quiet precision, multiplied by millions, that began to frustrate the enemy watching through the scope. Beyond its materials and engineering, the story of the M1 helmet was deeply human. On the battlefield, it became more than a piece of equipment. It was a lifeline, a companion, and in many cases, a savior. Countless letters and reports from the front tell the same story in different words. The bullet hit my helmet. Some wrote with disbelief, others with gratitude, and a few with quiet guilt that they had survived while others hadn't. The M1 had a strange way of making men pause and think about chance. In Normandy, medics treated soldiers who arrived dazed, bleeding from minor scalp cuts, their helmets bearing dents the size of a fist. In Italy, one sergeant wrote home that his helmet rang like a bell when struck by a sniper round. He kept it as a lucky charm. On Pacific Islands, Marines carried helmets with chipped brims and small holes, swearing they would never throw them away. German snipers, meanwhile, were keeping their own notes. After Normandy, several units reported what they called ghost wounds, confirmed hits where the target did not fall. One sniper wrote in a field journal recovered near Aachen, "The American helmet is cursed. It turns bullets. Of course, not every strike was deflected. The M1 could not stop a direct rifle shot at close range, and thousands of soldiers still suffered fatal head wounds. But its protection against fragments, ricochets, and glancing bullets was undeniable." American medical statistics from 1944 showed a nearly 20% reduction in fatal head injuries compared to early war figures. A difference credited largely to the helmet. Even German medical officers noticed. Captured helmets were tested by Wehrmacht pathologists, and their reports noted the impressive energy distribution of the steel. One even remarked that the M1's shallow angle caused ricochets that endangered nearby attackers, an irony not lost on the men firing the shots. Among the troops, the helmet became a small symbol of American ingenuity. Soldiers joked that it's the best friend you'll ever wear. They used it to cook stew, shave, collect rainwater, or dig trenches. It was practical, unpretentious, and quietly life-saving, much like the men who wore it. By the winter of 1944, even the enemy understood. The American helmet wasn't invincible, but it was good enough to make survival seem almost unfair. And as the Ardennes froze under German counterattack, the snipers' war with the M1 reached its most telling moment, December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge, the last great German offensive in the West. Snow blanketed the Ardennes in silence, broken only by rifle cracks and the distant rumble of tanks. Among the chaos, German snipers, the elite hunters of the forest, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fall the way they expected. From treetop nests and stone barns, they watched American columns move through the white haze. Every detail mattered. The rhythm of a march, the moment a helmet caught the light. The German Karabiner 98K rifle, fitted with its Zeiss scope, could deliver lethal accuracy at hundreds of yards. The men behind it had trained for years to make every bullet count. But now, something strange was happening. A sniper near Elsenborn Ridge reported firing 3 times at a U.S. officer. The man stumbled each time but kept crawling forward. When the Americans counterattacked and the sniper's position was overrun, his logbook was found beside his rifle. The last entry read simply, "Hit in the head. He does not die." Similar reports came in across the front. Some soldiers were knocked unconscious by grazing rounds, waking hours later with dented helmets. Others carried deep grooves or bullet scars in the steel as proof of their luck. Medics collected dozens of damaged helmets to send to command for inspection. The evidence was overwhelming. At First Army headquarters, ordnance officers examined the dented shells. They noted the same recurring pattern. The majority of strikes came at oblique angles, 30, 40, 50 degrees, and the bullet paths curved outward. The M1's sloped dome turned what would have been direct hits into deflections. Even fragments from artillery bursts often skidded across the steel rather than biting into it. Meanwhile, German snipers adapted. Some aimed lower, targeting the neck or torso. Others began calling the M1 the turtle shell. But even when adjusted, their confidence wavered. The helmet had altered a psychological balance, making the American soldier appear unnervingly resilient. For the first time, a simple piece of equipment had started to change, not just survival rates, but morale itself, on both sides of the rifle scope. In early January 1945, as the snow finally began to melt around Bastogne, German field engineers were ordered to conduct a full technical analysis of the American helmet. Captured specimens were sent to Kummersdorf, the Wehrmacht's testing ground for foreign equipment. What they found surprised even the scientists. Using a controlled rig, they fired both 7.92mm Mauser rounds and smaller caliber submachine gun bullets at different ranges and angles. The American M1 repeatedly deflected glancing shots that would have pierced the German Stahlhelm. The results weren't absolute. A direct hit still penetrated, but statistically, the difference was undeniable. The engineers' report concluded that the U.S. helmet's curvature and elastic hardness provide superior deflection characteristics, especially at oblique trajectories. It even noted that the steel's manganese content allowed the metal to momentarily flex before returning to shape, a self-tempering effect unknown in most European alloys at the time. German analysts also observed that the M1's two-piece design allowed for easier mass production and repair. Each component could be replaced independently, unlike the one-piece Stahlhelm. The Americans, one report read, sacrifice ornament for function. But on the front lines, these discoveries had a more immediate impact. German snipers grew increasingly hesitant to waste ammunition on headshots, focusing instead on center-mass kills. Still, they couldn't ignore what they saw. Men who should have died continuing to fight. Captured snipers later told interrogators that the experience was demoralizing. One even remarked, "We could not understand how so many survived our best shots. It was as if the helmet carried their luck." By spring, when the Allies crossed the Rhine and rolled into Germany itself, the M1 helmet had become an emblem of American endurance. Soldiers painted unit insignias on them, strapped camouflage nets around them, and refused to part with them even in rest camps. The steel pot had done more than protect lives. It had built confidence, turning ordinary infantrymen into soldiers who felt they could survive anything. And in the ruins of captured German bases, Allied intelligence would soon uncover files and sketches. Silent proof that the enemy had studied this simple helmet in awe and frustration, trying to understand the secret behind its stubborn resilience. When the war finally ended in 1945, American ordnance officers began compiling mountains of battlefield data, casualty figures, medical reports, and recovered gear. Among the countless artifacts of war, the M1 helmet stood out as one of the quiet success stories of the entire U.S. military machine. At the Surgeon General's office, analysts compared wound records from 1942 to 1945. The results were striking. Head and neck fatalities among U.S. infantry had dropped by nearly a quarter compared to early war engagements, even as combat intensity increased. The pattern was consistent across theaters, from Europe's forests to the Pacific Islands. The M1 had dramatically improved survivability. American doctors and engineers worked together to document how the helmet absorbed and redirected energy. They even performed controlled post-war tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground, firing everything from pistol rounds to shrapnel simulators. The same result emerged. At oblique angles, bullets simply refused to penetrate. The helmet wasn't perfect, but it was astonishingly efficient. Letters from veterans poured into ordnance depots, often enclosing the very helmets that had saved their lives. Dented, scorched, or split, but intact. One infantryman wrote from Italy, "It stopped what would have ended me. I owe everything to this piece of steel." These testimonials became part of a growing recognition that America's advantage in the war wasn't just its numbers or firepower. It was its ability to engineer survival into every soldier's kit. In official evaluations, the M1 was described as an outstanding success of American materials and design. It was inexpensive, easy to produce, adaptable across all branches of service, from paratroopers to medics. By 1945, it had become the global benchmark for protective headgear. But its legacy wouldn't stop with victory. Across the Atlantic, defeated armies were already taking notes. In the years immediately following Germany's surrender, military researchers across Europe and beyond began dissecting what made the M1 helmet so effective. The British, though satisfied with their own marksman design, acknowledged the American model's superior protection and comfort. The Soviets quietly studied captured M1s and even incorporated elements of its shape into their post-war SSH-60 and later SSH-68 helmets. For the defeated Germans, the lessons were humbling. In captured archives, Allied intelligence teams found precise ballistic tests comparing the Stahlhelm M42 and the US M1. The conclusions were blunt. While the German helmet offered deep side coverage, its sharper angles made it more vulnerable to ricochets and direct impacts. In the next generation of helmets, decades later, even German engineers would return to the American form. By the Korean War, the M1 had become not just standard issue but iconic. It appeared in every major conflict involving the United States for the next 40 years. From Incheon to Vietnam, its silhouette became synonymous with the American soldier. Adaptable, resilient, and confident under fire. And the German fascination never entirely disappeared. During the Cold War, NATO partners and former Axis nations alike drew inspiration from its engineering. West Germany's Bundeswehr, reformed in the 1950s, designed its M56 helmet directly from Allied research data, merging the protective strengths of both the M1 and the old Stahlhelm. By the 1980s, with the introduction of Kevlar helmets like the PSGT, the steel pot was finally retired. Yet, soldiers still kept them as mementos, flower pots, or keepsakes from a generation that survived the bloodiest war in human history. Even today, military historians regard the M1 not as a miracle, but as a triumph of practical design. It didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to work. And it did, again and again. And as the post-war world rebuilt, one quiet truth remained. Sometimes the smallest pieces of steel shape the fate of entire nations. When historians talk about the great weapons of the Second World War, they often mention tanks, bombers, and ships, the giants that defined victory and defeat. Yet the M1 helmet reminds us that not every innovation was loud or destructive. Some simply saved lives. It was, at its core, a modest piece of steel shaped by necessity and refined by experience. It didn't look heroic. It wasn't revolutionary in its appearance. But, for the soldiers who wore it, it was a quiet promise that someone back home had thought about their survival. For the German snipers who studied it, the M1 represented something more than protection. It symbolized the industrial precision, material abundance, and practical ingenuity that gave the United States its edge in the war. Each ricochet, each failed shot, was proof that the enemy had mastered not only weapons of offense, but tools of endurance. Decades later, Veterans still tell stories of how that helmet saved them, how a bullet struck, how they fell, how they realized they were still alive. The dents and scratches became personal histories etched into steel. In the end, the M1 didn't just protect soldiers from bullets. It embodied the American philosophy of warfare in the 20th century. Simple, efficient, adaptable, and built to last. From the forests of the Ardennes to the beaches of Incheon, it became a silent witness to courage and survival. And though time has moved on, that sound, a bullet glancing off steel in the frozen woods of Europe, still echoes through history. It reminds us that innovation is not always about power. Sometimes it's about endurance. Sometimes it's about a helmet that turned fear into faith and made even the enemy stop and stare.